I'm gonna move through a couple steps really quickly to show you how to get a pattern that looks more like my spider pattern back here. And this is also going to resemble what's more of what's called a tossed repeat. It's not 100% a true tossed repeat, but it is. And so what I'm gonna do first is I'm gonna move through these a little quickly. So I created a new layer and I'm going to label this tossed. And then I'm gonna drag it under our shape layer. So you're just clicking and dragging to be able to move that. I want my tossed layer to be between my shapes in my background. And then I'm going to hand draw in some details. So I'm selecting my brush tool over on this left toolbar, and I'm gonna select a color. I am a fan of a complementary or somewhat complementary color scheme. So I'm gonna select this kind of orange color and change my brush size up here at the top. I want something that's actually pretty large because I don't want to overthink what my objects really are. So I changed my pixel size of my brush, and I'm going to draw some shapes in randomly. For sake of this workshop, I'm not overthinking what these things are. And I encourage you not to overthink what those things are either. The important note in this step is that you do not touch the edge of your canvas. So this whole thing is your canvas. If this is cut off, that's bad news bears. Don't do that. You want it to be everything inside the square. And I'm just kind of throwing some miscellaneous shapes around, making sure not to touch that edge. Once I get some shapes distributed through here, a couple more, what I'm gonna do, make sure my tossed layer is still selected. I'm gonna do that offset step again so that I can move these things over. By moving these things over, it's gonna show me where any gaps are, and I can start to fill those gaps and make sure that this is a little more fluid and more evenly spaced. So I'm going to filter. Once you've used the offset function once, it defaults to the very top. So I only need to select filter offset, and it's going to automatically do the 600. It's going to shift everything to the right and down. And so I can see how things are starting to line up. I want to add another shape here. So this allows you to draw into these boundaries that if you wanted to do this without the offset function, you would end up cutting them off the canvas, and there's no recovering that. I also want to get rid of my guides because when you have the guides showing, it'll snap your brush to the guides and it makes it more difficult. So this is really quick. View, clear guides. I don't need those anymore. Everything's in position. So I usually repeat the offset step anywhere from 2 to 4 times when doing something like this, right? Where it's miscellaneous, it's not images, it's just kind of randomized patterning in here. And again, make sure you have your tossed, and I'm adding shapes into things that seem like they might be a little larger gap. Not worried about anything cut off because that's just the offset function. Maybe I add a couple tiny ones for good measure. So now I have 3 layers. They're all 3 visible over here. I'm gonna go to edit. I'm gonna define this pattern again because I've made changes. Anytime you make a change, you have to define that pattern another time. So I've defined a new pattern with my tossed layer. I'm going to my big file. I don't need to make any changes. I don't need to make a new big file. I can just come back to this one and see what it looks like. Go to edit, fill, select my new pattern from that drop down, let that process. And now I have a half drop pattern and what is more perceived as a tossed repeat. It doesn't have any structure necessarily. Technically it does, but I don't want to dig into technicalities here because it's not necessarily beneficial to this. But I have now this 3-layer pattern, including my solid background, my tossed layer, and my half drop bug pattern. So there are a huge number of different things you can do with this. I give you just some examples. I would spend 20 hours putting together different ways that this could be used. I have some different examples of what this can look like, the pattern creation examples, and I've used this to print fabric for hand towels. Again, an example of the blanket that you've seen here. I've also had patterns printed through Walmart onto just their fleece blankets. And so once you get better and better with the steps, like you can take imaging, use your own drawings, like that's what these are behind me, is these are drawings that I moved into Photoshop and isolated just as a single object. If you think about, there's the socks that people make that are really popular that like are usually like kids' heads or cat heads or something like that, like very expensive socks, like $25 or something like that. But there's a number of different really fun things that you can do with this, included just a few of the links of places that you can utilize these services. But if you were to have a blanket printed through Walmart, for example, then what you actually have to do is create a file that is the size of the blanket. So the example that I give you is a Walmart fleece blanket that's 50 by 60. So instead of creating a 48 by 48 file, I would create a 50 by 60 file, fill that, and then I would save that as a JPEG image. And that's what I would upload into there.